Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Translation Studies and Training, SOTST, Master's Degree Programs. Master of Arts, Translation Studies, Maths, English, MTT-011 Translation, History and Tradition. Block-1 Asian Tradition of Translation, Meaning and Scope. Unit-1 The Asian Tradition of Translation, An Introduction. 1.0 Objectives. This unit deals with the translation tradition of Asian countries. Having read this, unit learners shall be able to know what are the linguistic conditions of Asian continent, what are the cultural suits among these languages, where does the place and tradition of translation sit among these, how the translation tradition has been in Asian countries. 1.1 Introduction. Size and population. Asia, the world's largest continent in terms of both, is located in the northern hemisphere. Its borders meet Europe in the west. Asia and Europe are sometimes referred to as Eurasia. Asian continent, Mediterranean Sea, Atlantic Ocean, Arctic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, and is surrounded by the Indian Ocean. The Caucasus Mountains and the Ural Mountains naturally separate Asia from Europe. Major countries of Asia continent are Azerbaijan, Armenia, Israel, Indonesia, Iran, Iraq, Uzbekistan, North Korea, Oman, Cambodia, Kazakhstan, Kuwait, Kyrgyzstan, China, Japan, Jordan, Turkey, Turkmenistan, Taiwan, Tajikistan, Thailand, South Korea, Nepal, Pakistan, East Timor, Philippines, Bangladesh, Burma, Bahrain, Bhutan, Brunei, India, Mongolia, Malaysia, Maldives, Qatar, Laos, Lebanon, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, Syria, Yemen etc. Sumer civilization, Indian civilization, Chinese civilization were born in this continent. China and India are also the most populous countries in the world. The long land border in the west separates Europe from Asia. This range runs in the north-south direction down to the Ural Mountains in Russia, along the Ural River to the Caspian Sea, and then through the Caucasus Mountains to the Black Sea. About 3/4 of Russia's land area is in Asia, and the rest in Europe. Some territories of 4 other Asian countries also come within the border of Europe. 30% of the total land area of the world is in Asia. The population of this continent is more than the combined population of all other continents, about 60%. From the icy Arctic in the north to the warm equator in the south, this continent covers an area of about 44,579,000 square km. It covers an area that includes some vast empty deserts, some of the world's tallest mountains, and some of the longest rivers. According to the data given on Wikipedia on March 2013, its population is 387.9 million and the population density is 89 per square kilometer. It is bound to be a wide spectrum of linguistic and cultural diversity in such a large populated land. The existence of a long tradition of translation work for the exchange of feelings, thoughts and objects is also certain here. Otherwise, the silence of unfamiliarity would have been overshadowed for a long time in the entire geographical landscape. 1.2 Linguistic context of Asian countries. March 2013, according to the data given on Wikipedia and Lingviamun, about 2,000 languages are spoken in this vast continent of 47 countries, which are divided into different linguistic families. Some of these are found only in the continent of Asia and connect other continents to the world. The language families found in the Asian continent are Altaic, Dravidian, Sino-Tibetan, Austro-Asiatic, Afro-Asiatic, Indo-European etc. There are some languages whose exact sources have not been found. Some of them may be named for Japanese, Korean, Ainu, Gilyak or Burushaski. The continent of Asia has great diversity in terms of the number of speakers. Some languages are also such that only a few speakers are left. For example, some languages of Siberia can be named. It is worth noting that 3 languages of Asia, Chinese, Hindi and Bengali, are among the 5 most spoken languages in the world. The official languages of Asia are endemic to most countries. Because of this, many local languages are under threat from the pressure of other local languages. The danger is also from colonial languages, but like other continents, this danger is relatively less here. Nevertheless, there are countries where languages such as English or French are official. English is co-official in countries such as India, Pakistan, Singapore, while French is a recognized language in countries such as Cambodia and Vietnam. It is noteworthy that Asian languages have given many words to languages around the world: tufan, chai, Chinese; jungle, shampoo, Hindi; aam, Tamil; lacha, carambola, Malay; kaki, bonsai, Japanese; many words like sag, pyala, Persian; juta, kushk, Turkish; lama, Tibetan; panda, Nepali; mammoth, Osset, are examples of this. 1.3 Western translation tradition and the Asian movement. Like other discussions, translation discussions were also dominated by Western speakers. Around the 15th century, Bible translations began, and around the 16th century, there was also an extensive tradition of translations of Greek and Roman, classical literature. An attitude of learning something good was at work behind the Roman and Greek translations. Poets like Pope Dryden were increasing the pride of their language by assimilating timeless works and giving a model of good writing in front of the coming writers. The arrogance of the colonial rule robbed the English translations of the modesty with which one is accustomed to think on behalf of the other, and the constant effort, in translations and in other endeavors, to act for the benefit of others. How do I utilize my labor? What should I do so that the person in front of me likes it and his interest is also strengthened, his difficulties, of lessons or others, go away, it becomes easier for him to understand the meaning of the greater life. Many centuries passed as this approach developed. Some missionaries and British officials, such as Elphinstone, tended towards such liberal, hermeneutic translations. In the 19th century, the hermeneutic philosophy of translation began to operate in the translation of not only the Bible but also of textbooks, and developed in the Asian, intertextual, colloquial tradition, distinct from Western hermeneutics. 1.4 Asian tradition of translation. In Asian countries, there has been a centuries-old tradition of interpretative translations of both folk and sastra. It is well known that translation work is the transfer of a text from one language to another. We call the original language the source language, and the translated language the target language. In this sequence, the translated text seems to be a child of the original text. Her attachment to the parent's text is full, but she does not follow it literally. In between, she also takes her autonomous flights. Of course, that flight is not that free. In the translated text, there is a strong notion of carrying forward the tradition of the original text, preserving the memories of that text from generation to generation, protecting it from the ravages of place and time, and maintaining its relevance. In fact, many subtle meanings are hidden in the corners of the text. Translators and commentators have the subtle discretion to decide which meaning will be applicable in which era, in which place, in which group it will take a new incarnation. Those who want to maintain a vocal dialogue with their tradition and who interpret contemporary experiences in the light of ethnic and historical experiences, the past is not considered separate from the present. Asian countries have been the abode of spiritual gurus and religious texts, discourses, shrutis, anushrutis, commentaries, anubhashyas, promises, disputes, dialogues. From ideological point of view, let us take three important units in front of us. Filled circle Hindu scriptures. Filled circle Buddhist and Jain scriptures. Filled circle commentary translation of Guru Granth Sahib and Quran. India, Japan, Java, Sumatra, China and Sri Lanka is not literal, it is emotional and explanatory. Intertextual in a way. Their native and Marji traditions have been many. The Quran was translated in the countries of Central Asia, and since each word in Arabic has multiple meanings, there were few authentic translations, and there was no scope for intertextual flights for political reasons. The difficulty of the text was maintained for political reasons. According to the era, new meanings were possible in them too, but they, common people, did not get the exemption of intimate gossip from the text. The translations are good and coherent, but somewhat formal. NDIANR's texts were translated into Persian. Behind this there is a big role of liberal people like Dara Shikoh, a proof of the cultural exchanges that took place through the Chinese travelers Fahim, Shang Yun, Thijing, Yong or the Indian scholars Dharmakirti, Kumrajiva, Buddhajiva, Dharmakshetra, Sangamurti, Mahendra Sanghamitra etc., the language of the liturgy promoted by the Buddhist sect called Shokakai. It is recited by the disciples of Japan's peace fighter, Maharishi Ikeda, in every corner of the world for the sake of environment modification. Its language is ancient Chinese. The original text is of Sanskrit Pali. It was sometimes translated into Chinese by Kumrajiva. The interesting thing is that in Roman script it is distributed among the peace fighters of all the countries of the world. This, Shokakai, is an organization of educated rich people whose character is similar to the philanthropist society that flourished after the World War. This is a kind of help group, which gives moral support in everyone's crisis and a little financial support too, and recites together in a loud voice. An interesting example of a translation of such a liturgy is Myoho Renge Kyo, Hoban Por Dai Ni, Niji to San Jusan Mayan Jodi. Here, the lav is pronounced like Namyo, and knowledgeable people say that Sanskrit, Hindi, Naman, which means to bow in reverence, is it equivalent. Here the whole hymn, which echoes various versions of ancient Japanese, Chinese and Pali translations, says in a nutshell that the unopened lotus that stands bowed in the mud within us, may bloom fully in the light of wisdom. The meaning of Om Mani Padmo, etc., which is sung in the temples of Ladakh, is almost the same. Apart from this, Saddharmapundrik, the great propagator of Mahayana in China, Bodhisattva Kumrajiva, translated many other important sutras, such as Paramita Sutra, Satshastra, Vimalkirti, Instructions etc. Around the year 405, Kumrajiva, AD 344–413, was a prolific translator. This great preacher of Buddhism had learned Chinese language in the jail. While living among the common prisoners, he got used to the common language of conversation. A big movement for writing literature in this common colloquial language started later, when ordinary people took a pledge that, our hands will write only what our mouth speaks, but Kumrajiva created the role of this revolutionary initiative many decades ago. All his translations are glorious and fluid, despite being close to the spoken language. The Madhyam Nikai, of which he was the presenter, his language style also seems to be a reflection of the same. Madhyam Nikai. All the translations made by Dharmapriya etc. in 382 AD seem confused in front of this. An expert in the Indian tradition of linguistics, Kumrajiva was well aware of the importance of appropriate coordination of semantics, and his main emphasis was on intelligibility. He considered translation as a collaborative effort. He has also protected the sarcasm and musicality of the dialogues in his translations. It was the effect of his translations that during the time of King Liang, AD 502–549, the whole state had become Buddhist. Kumrajiva used to recite line by line while sitting in front of a group of Chinese scholars. Stopping at each line, he used to convey its Chinese meaning orally in colloquial Chinese language. The scholar council used to make linguistic refinements with its critical remarks. A clerk used to write the revised translation, later an editor would check its style and internal coherence. Later on, a calligrapher used to check the Chinese words, ideography, to make sure that there is no scope for a big mistake due to small carelessness. When Kumrajiva returned to China during the reign of the last king of the Qin dynasty, he stayed in their capital, Fujian, for 8 years and translated 300 volumes of 35 Buddhist texts, Tesho Tripitaka, Vol. 55, p. 11. These were vital translations of the Chinese public mind of that era. E.g., works of Nagarjuna, Padmashutra Tika and other comprehensive sutras of Mahayana, Mahaviveka Sutra, Vimalkirti Sutra etc. The Tiantai school played a major role in propagating the Pundarika Sutra, and in the 13th century, Nichiren Daishonin, having imbibed the philosophy of the presence of 3000 states of mind in the soul at every moment, made a heartbreaking remark after extensive study and meditation that Kumrajiva conveyed the sutras of Shakya Muni Buddha to them as they were. Others have added, water to milk, poison to medicine, quoted by U.H.E. Kawai, p. 147. When Kumrajiva was offered to fire after his death, his bones turned to ashes, but he lay on a blue lotus with such a glow that even the sunlight would blush. Dedicated to the glory of a great translator, this symbolic story gives a different description of the translation tradition of Asia. 1.5 Ancient and medieval translations. The world economy and gross domestic product, GDP, were influenced by Iran, Iraq, India and China till 1800. Due to the trading ships floating on the Indian Ocean and the entire Silk Route, the translation-dependent mixed language became the medium of mutual communication between the buyer and the seller. The way the buying and selling of goods became a medium of cultural exchange, its story is very interesting. Traders used to bring home different types of stories along with goods and furnishings. In Connection with the cultural exchange from Mozambique to Malacca. A series of translations were also included during the trading activities in the great ships floating on the Indian Ocean. The story of the contract of hearts will also be written in the exchange of these things. Mythological stories, Arabian Nights, translation of mythological texts by Dara Shikoh, and establishment's assistance to translation work, ceremonially organizing debates. All the experiences will be recorded there, where there will be no initial attack. No overland trade. Before the 7th century, gold moving in a linear manner came from Western Europe to the Byzantium and then to the coastal countries of the Indian Ocean. The transport of gold stopped since the Muslim invasions and the trend of silver and shiny ballads increased. Sassanid silver prevailed over the gold of Persia and Byzantium in the Eastern epics, folk tales etc. dominated over the Western glory texts. China, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam and India kept expanding. From Marx to Wittfogel, they never tire of talking about Asian mode of production, hydraulic state, Oriental despotism, etc. Even in the literature, there is continuous mention of increasing dominance of cultural treasures. This is the time when the rich translation of Pali Prakrit and Sanskrit into the local languages of different countries was done by all the Buddhists, Armenian, Persian, Jewish, European and Bamiyan traders and other travelers. Missionaries continued to arrive on the Indian shores, through cave mouth. Translation of cultural treasures with requests like, Khulja Sim Sim, it kept opening. Later, when the game of cultural upheaval started, some inconsistent situations emerged. But it cannot be denied that the role of these translations was important in the development of the profound cultural vision of the world. Brodel writes, it is said that the sea is everything. If someone is willing to make an effort, it provides an opportunity for unity, communication and exchange. Otherwise, it is a huge barrier, which is very difficult to cross. Apart from the general ocean, these principles are also applicable to the story ocean and the translation ocean. In the first volume of the Cambridge History of India, about the trade of Europeans with India, K.N. Chaudhary writes, the trade between the west coast of India and the Red Sea was dominated, but not monopolized, by the Cairo-based merchant organization, Karim. R.V. Sargent has shown on the basis of contemporary Arabic sources that Indian ships used to visit the ports of South Arabia regularly, and Gujarati traders had settled in this area by the 15th century. S.D. Goitian has gathered ample evidence to show that Indian trade was quite cosmopolitan in character. In this, even the Jewish merchant could achieve high status along with his Hindu brothers and Muslim friends. It seems that Karim, formed in the 12th century, has already come under a lot of pressure by the 15th century before the appearance of the Portuguese in the Indian Ocean. Pearson and Chaudhary have discussed Mehraj Thakur's Mahamati Prannath trade spread to Arabia in the light of concrete facts. Even the Hindu merchants who avoided sea travel were so engrossed in their thoughts and trends that the Jewish merchants who considered Muslims as friends considered them as their brothers. The characters of many Jewish legends are Hindu. These days people do not get tired of talking about his rational accounting and rational business ethics, and it is worth noting that even without European intervention, not only business but also cultural dialogue was maintained in Asian countries. The intertextual flights of many folklores are proof of this. Motifs like Faras Ka Ghoda, Odankhatola etc. are also an important version of the story of shared culture. Purushottam Agrawal also writes with confidence that only the European version of Enlightenment came into circulation. Similar ideological movements took place in Asia as well, but many Enlightenment thinkers and translators were able to enter the normative memory because they were not in German, French or English and rather thought in the languages of China, India, Arabia and Africa. Their mutual translations remain scattered due to lack of political and institutional promotion, but many evidences of cultural exchange proposed by translation are found in folklore. 1.6 Colonial translations, mixture, adaptation. William Jones is a well-known name in colonial translation. He translated Jayadeva's Gita Govinda, 1792, and Kalidasa's Abhijanana Shakuntalam, 1789. In the Indian tradition, Gita Govinda is a fleshly poem, dialogue between lovers. Representation of their emotional, bodily beauty gives it a different identity. But it has been transformed in translation, and Jones considers it a part of the mystical poetry of Persian and Hindi. In his foreword, he discusses that he did not modify much on his part. But his every stanza suffers from the attitude of serving it as a wonder in front of the Europeans. After reading it is understood that it has a very different character from the Asian tradition of translation. In the words of Ashish Nandi, the colonial rule created its legality with the formula to establish a parallel relationship between primitive emotions and childhood. Some civilizations are still passing through childhood and it is necessary to encourage them, to shower blessings on them. Translation was a source of this encouragement. In the last few years of the 19th century, Edwin Arnold translated some selected parts of the Indian scriptures under the name Pearls of Faith in the Orient. On the other hand, the Asiatic Society of Bengal also sponsored the translation of Mukund Ram Chakrabarti's long poem, Chandimangala Kavya, and also of Hitopadesha. The translation of both shows a clear departure from the European tradition of translation, and they are also quite different from the commentaries of the Asian tradition. Almost all translations of this period are overshadowed by Macaulay's Minutes on Education, a part of which we quote. I have no knowledge of Sanskrit, nor of Arabic. I have read these texts only in translation, or have heard their discussion from educated people. The general opinion of all of them is that all the books of India and Arabia together would not be able to fill even a section of a good European library. There is certainly some speed in the poem, but all the poetry books taken together are inferior to the summaries used in the primary schools of England. Macaulay, T.B., Selected Writings, ed. John Clive Thomas Pinney, Chicago p. 241. 1972. The undermining European translation tradition created a special type of symbolic order and became the first qualification for Indian text to enter the Mahadwara. Apart from its traditions, its ethnic memories, its statement postures, a reduced summary was being served. Moreover, Rabindranath Tagore's auto-translations also did not remain untouched by this. Sometimes the translation, to be understood by the Englishman, became a new text full of new images and sentence structures. A confession of Ravi Babu also appeared in the Christian Science Monitor. The 16th of October 1916. Commenting on a poet from Seattle, he wrote, I wish you could read it in the original Bangla. My English translations do not capture that. Every nation has its own symbol language, its own symbols of expression. When I translate my own works, I have to find new images. A similar confession is made by Ravi Babu in his letter to Alice Rothstein, as long as I am in the West, I have to prove that the citizens of India are also punctual and use idioms and pronunciation of their food habits. In me they are just like you Westerners. Actually, we have to translate ourselves, otherwise you will not understand. Rather, a wrong understanding will arise. If I were Rabindranath of the East, I would appear before you as I am at this moment, and my people would certainly laugh at me, thinking that this man has forgotten the date. But translation has to follow a different grammar, and has to be very accurate. In a letter to William Pearson, he writes that if some parts of the original Bangla novel are omitted in the English translation, then the English readers will find it strange, and they will get bored with it. The result of this impatience is that even the good literature of Asia is not selected for translation in France, Germany or England. The worry of being taught, chosen, and being considered worthy in their eyes is similar to the worry of village girls who are repeatedly rejected by boys. The bride should be liked by the husband. Husband may be totally crazy, but she has to adjust according to his choice. This worry is natural but unjustified. This concern dominates the translation of the entire Gitanjali and the other 5 poetry anthologies. In the English translation, Indian bhaktis, respect, friendliness etc. have been translated into a compassionate Christian sentiment. Overall, the translations get imprisoned in the stereotype that message of peace is being given in a cold voice by some mystic of the East to a war-weary, plundered Europe, as if this too is a service. We can make this clear with an example. The third song of Gitanjali is. The word, master, occurs repeatedly in this translation. Now see how different the literal translation is. In another instance, a strange kind of fearful brevity comes to the fore. The title of the poem is Heart Space. Its difference can be recognized from its literal translation. Translation of Rabindranath. Transliteration. It is noteworthy that gradually Ravi Babu overcame his adaptation frustration. Many later letters are proof that gradually he understood the importance of safeguarding awkwardness in the rhythm of the commentary tradition of Asia. Self-defense is justified, even in law, so why not in translation? In his letter to Dinesh Chandra Sen, he admitted that he himself translated his works, that's why he took so many exemptions. Incomplete knowledge of English language became the carrier of the tendency to jump over every difficult stone. In a letter to Ajit Chakrabarti, he said that he could only do summarization of English. The daughters-in-law walk in the countryside adorned with all ornaments and clothes, while going on long journeys and pilgrimages, they have to wear a simple dress, but they do not give up the vermilion. The funny thing about this image is that the journey to a distant country seems to be comparable to a pilgrimage to them. And the essence itself smiles, becoming the symbol of the vermilion. This is the symbolic system of the language which is really difficult to cross. Overcoming all such challenges, the Asian tradition of translation looks full of confidence at the point it has reached today. Despite objections from Indian English writers such as Salman Rushdie in the West, A.K. Ramanujan, Sujit Mukherjee, Amit Chaudhary, Harish Trivedi, Harish Narang, J.G.V. Prasad, Meenakshi and thousands of translators like Meenakshi Mukherjee, Jasveer Jan, Anand Prakash, Ritu Menon are doing their work patiently, and this tradition of Asian translation is being lit up in its own way in China and Japan as well. It seems to become an Asian opposition to the world. 1.7 Chinese and Japanese translations. Missionaries who came to China, from St. Francis to Risi, had meaningful dialogues with the wisdom of Confucius, and with wisdom laid the foundation for a new tradition of two-way translation. But the translation of common sense from a commercial industrial culture was not so easy. Several points of resistance emerged. The Ying, Yang and Ming dynasties strongly opposed westernization, but the Yang movement that started after the Opium War, 1540, underlined the need for detailed translation of Western knowledge, science, and technical texts. In those days a large number of Chinese students were sent to the West on scholarships, and in later years they became the guardians of modern translations, commentaries of traditional texts. Scientific translations proved even more difficult. How Darwin's evolution could be translated into a linguistic tradition where nature and man were united, not victims of any hierarchy, and where the movement of linear time was circular, it was difficult even for social scientists to explain the concept of progress. Yan translated J.S. Mill's On Liberty into modern Chinese, and in his foreword, he writes that freedom has a different connotation from liberty in the Chinese language. Even in this important translation, many places have been dealt with summarily, and every effort has been made to retain the drama and liveliness of the mother tongue. Important work has been done through the initiative of this new type of sentence formation. These translations have played an important role in bringing the sentimental mind from the mind of the divine kingdom to the mind of evolution. This is a new link in the Asian translation tradition. The difficulty with Japanese was that until the Tang dynasty, AD 618 to 907, it remained primarily a vernacular language. In later years it functioned as a lingua franca. And during the days when the Chinese were engaged in resistance to Western culture, it was used quietly. Western classics and scriptures were translated into new sources of knowledge refutation. A special kind of translation language developed which was largely performative. A new interpretation of individualism, feminism, modernity, democracy etc. was prepared. The different character which has emerged today sets an example for everyone. When Buddhists went to China in the 3rd-4th century, they introduced a different translation method, which they called Ko-A. Especially Kumrajiva felt that first the main text, which is new, should be conveyed through translation, and rest of the similar concepts should be edited in the beginning. A match should be made later to see how Taoism's doctrine of Bu meets Buddha's Sunya. 1.8 Central Asian translation, a hallmark. Literary history not only creates coherence, but also legitimizes it in the process. As with English literature taught in other colonies, English in Central Asia continued to paint a misleading picture of a continuum from Beowulf to Virginia Woolf, and until recently, Arabic literature was portrayed as a historical fragment and a critical dystopia. The legend of constant ups and downs, the storehouse of moral decay continued. Literary modernity came on the shoulders of translation and imitation trends. To what extent a whole series of religious and political movements from Baghdad in the 13th century to Beirut in the 19th century could bring about a renaissance. This is a subject of deep investigation. The double references of translation in the form of betrayal and hijacking etc. continued to be evaluated here. In later times, Brazil's anthropophobia movement, Yazar's transcreation, Borwege's theory of mistranslation, together established the fact in the consciousness of the Middle East that even if translation from the West has to be done on its own terms, translation is not imitation, it is dialogue. The original text wavers and unsteady, as pulp of clay from which new idols can be made. Translation should seem like a translation, only then dialogue will be possible. Translation is like modern law. You can have a conscious conversation with yourself without erasing the self. Two languages, two cultures can influence and excite each other in the same way as two modern lovers. We can see the beginning of this whole feeling in the translations of Muhammad Lufti Juma. In 1899, Guy Naval Boothby wrote a novel, Imperial Gothic. The lines in which Mr. Lufti translated it into Arabic reflect all the social tensions of the time in a pleasant tone. In this we can see the foregrounding of the contemporary tradition of Asian translation. Lufti is not discussed in the Nadawi literary history, but the existential challenges of a nation in the making are the strength of this subversive, irritating translation, fueled by the tactics of rewriting, expanding and summarizing. It does not appear to be mummification from anywhere and emerges as a phosphorescent torch of hybridity. Social evolution, criminology, disintegration theory and futuristic science are presented here in a different style, and that side of England is also underlined in strong language, which George Bernard Shaw called advanced state of rottenness. 1.9 Asian theory of translation. Marx spoke of the Asiatic mode of production. We can also talk of an Asian mode of translation. Here no text is anyone's private property. The role of free radicals. In chemistry, the role of the original text in this tradition should be considered the same. Any text here is a common property which can be used by anyone. In any way, it is a concept of trusteeship of literary property, where the distance between author-translator is thin. The one who reads meditatively, the lesson belongs to him, whatever he does to it. This vivid tradition of the merging of the self is found free from the complex rights of copyright. Devout poets used to put their names in their texts, not for self-promotion, but to underline the evidence of direct experience. In the 12th century, Anandavardhana considers Dhwani as the basis of this new reorganization. The thing already said can also be new due to twisting of Dhwani. Amarushatik also suggests two methods of new ascension or reorganization of old material: justifying, substitution, Pratibimba Kalp, and Alekhya Kalp, which Amaruka calls Padarthaharan, Rajshekhar calls Parpur Pravesh, or Anyavanivandita. Walter Benjamin considers this in his own way a participation in the afterlife in the text, and the drawing of history in the text embracement is essential for him. Ideology, poetics and discourse embrace each other on those surfaces of the language or reveal their uniqueness. Splitting away, translation remains alert to them. Sometimes if the bones of the old language get tired, then the language that has come through translation gives them new energy, a new language. This is what the Brazilians call it cannibalization, but here it is intended to have a positive meaning. Benjamin calls this the piercing of the bones with silver. This silver piercing is because this foreigner should also shine. Roland Barthes calls it a tissue of quotations with a distinctly rough and tumble characterization when its strangeness shines through. Actually, this roughness is the specialty of speech. Now the era of very smooth, ready-made translations has passed. Good translation helps to assimilate the music of otherness. He also destroys our inner walls by affecting our polysystem. Closed doors don't lead anywhere. Creation is needed for survival. Homi Bhabha calls translation a strategy of cultural rescue in the sense that it will become a means of regeneration, in this sense. 1.10 Baghdad tradition of translation. It started during the reign of Umayyad dynasty rulers, AD 661 to 750. This enterprise flourished during the reign of Abbasid dynasty rulers, AD 750-1258. The reign of Al-Mamun, AD 813 to 833, is considered as the golden age. The center of this whole effort was Baghdad, which was built by the Abbasid Caliph Al-Mansur, AD 754-75. Such unprecedented fidelity to translation was not seen there before. Al-Mansur appointed many translators and got a translation chamber built. In this, works related to Indian astrology, astronomy, mathematics etc. were translated. Works like Aristotle's Ethics were also translated during this period. The translation of this period had three characteristics. 1. Their source languages were many: Sanskrit, Persian, Greek, Syrian etc. 2. Translations of various disciplines were done here: philosophy, astrology, chemistry, medical science etc. 3. Translation chamber was established to do translation here through government efforts. 1.11 Translation, assimilation of Ramakatha. Various translations of Ramakatha have an important contribution in the Asian tradition of translation. During the reign of Akbar, Abdul Qadir Badayuni translated Ramayana into Persian. Although this wasn't done with dedication, it was a translation done reluctantly under official pressure. Ramacharitamanus by Tulsi, Krittivasa. Ramayana, Bangla, Kamba Ramayana, Tamil, English translation by William Carey in 1802, and by Ramesh Chandra Dutt in 1899. Sheikh Sadullah Masih's translation of Ramayana a Masih mention is important in this context. The Western translation of the Asian translation theory is a re-establishment of the basic fact that the road from language to language is never closed. 1.12 Summary. The task of translation should not be to remove the dead skin of the original text, but to investigate the sources that create the meaning. Instead of doing a commentary, sitting on the margins across the text, one should find a way for the development of the text. The work of translation becomes heavy due to analyses of the text, making sense of its deep, subtle, hidden, and intended meaning of the original creator. Every culture tells a story. Advertisement and narration are the means to tell this story. When a nation feels that its cultural dignity is being recognized abroad, it starts giving it a different kind of esteem. Translation is a conscious means of telling a story in a new form. This is a natural and continuous process of the village that is the world. During translation, language creates new realities, and new windows open in the intimacy of two languages. Octavia Paz said in one of her talks, "Imagine how the Chinese translated Sanskrit texts, the Jews translated Greek texts in Alexandria, or the Romans translated Greek texts. The history of different civilizations is actually the history of their translation. The essence of every culture is very distinct, and translation is the most efficient way of communicating with that other. The essence of the Asian tradition of translation is the very thing which has been accepted by the post-colonial translation studies scholars all over the world today as intertextual travel. These scholars have also played a big role in getting the independent translations of popular versions of Ramayana, Mahabharata, Vrihatkathamanjari, Panchtantra, Jatak tales etc. recognized. Instead of looking at the translation in an unknown sense, carrying the bundle of our cultural identity with us, we have to perform the work of a language manager while commenting on linguistic politics. There is a great lesson to be learned from the Asian tradition of translation. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates, and we will see you with the next chapter.